Hi kids, what's up? It's Phil, and we are live and we are talking about some English. Okay, so today I am your English teacher. I'll be your English teacher through the rest of October, through November, and then finally to your test in December. We are doing the CBE, which is a short version of your usual English stuff. And there's a few things that we're going to have to study through this period. Okay, I hope you have your material. You may not have physical copies of it, but I'm pretty sure it's in your email. And if you open the one that says study guide, okay, there it is. It'll tell you what we are going to study. We got Antigone by Sophocles. We got The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. Daybreak in Alabama, which is a short poem by Langston Hughes, and we'll look at that next week. And of Clay We Are Created, which we are studying right now by Isabel Allende. And finally, By the Waters of Babylon by Stephen Vincent Benet, which is also a short story. We're not going to go in that order, but those are the things that we're going to be studying. Antigone and the Alchemist are the longer ones, so those will probably be two videos. The short stories and poems, I'm only going to make one short video. If you have any questions, of course, you can always ask me. You know how to reach me on WhatsApp. Since this is a shorter class than usual, you're probably not going to have time to read all the longer pieces. The short ones, I really suggest that you read. They're actually pretty good short stories. And try to at least look at the longer pieces too, guys. I know that you have a lot of work to do, and this kind of came last minute. But if you can at least try to read some of it, it will help. But especially the short stories, come on, you can do that really quickly. You guys are pretty good readers. But let's get to it. Let's get to it. And look at these slides here for End of Clay We Are Created, which is a story by Isabel Allende. And first, of course, you got to know a little bit about the author. It's very important, guys. If you look in your study guide, it tells you the things that you really need to focus on, from grammar structure, which we'll do a little bit of that too. I forgot to mention, I'll make a video about that. But they do say what you should really try to focus on: vocabulary, have some background information on the author and things like that. Biographical information is always important, because at the end you're also going to have a bit of an essay that you need to write. And they won't tell us what the essay is on, but just know that these are the things that they want you to focus on. It says, read the following works of literature and be familiar with basic biographical information about the authors in the time period in which each work was written. So Isabel Allende, she is a Chilean author and journalist. The 28th president of Chile, Salvador Allende, was her uncle and godfather. He was ousted in a coup. Okay, so this happened around the 70s, guys. Same thing that happened here in Brazil with the military takeover. She wrote for and edited a feminist magazine in the 1960s. And since 1982, she has written more than 20 books, most of them novels. So this story is coming out around the 80s, okay? That's when it was published, this story. And here are some of her other works. She's got The House of Spirits from 1982. Eva Luna, 1989, is where this short story comes from. The Stories of Eva Luna, okay, 1989. It's from, actually, I think it's from The Stories of Eva Luna. I apologize. City of Beasts, 2002, The Long Petal of the Sea. So there you have some of her work. And let me put myself back on the screen very quickly. If you have your CBE PDF there, okay, which is this big one over here, In the first page, it'll give you a more detailed look at her biography. And remember, like they said, you will probably need to know some of this information when you are taking your test. So please look at that. Let's move ahead. Her literary style. Okay, well, she blends a lot of genres. Sometimes in just one story, she can blend a lot of genres, and critics say that as a good thing about her. Okay, it's one of her talents. She often uses a style called magical realism, which critics debate whether this story that we're looking at uses this or not. Okay, and what is magical realism? It's a literary or artistic genre in which a realistic story and naturalistic technique are combined with surreal elements of dreams or the supernatural. A genre where magical or unreal elements play a natural part in the otherwise realistic. Okay. A blending of fantasy and reality so that the distinction between the two is erased. Gabriel Garcia Marquez in Mexico, surrealism runs through the streets. Surrealism comes from the reality of Latin America. France wrote the ordinary as miraculous and the miraculous as ordinary. So it's a very popular literary style. Again, there's a question about whether you think this short story uses that. And I think you can make an argument for both. Okay. And some examples of of magical realism outside of books is they're all over in movies, but one that I really like is Guillermo del Toro. He uses this a lot in his movies. So if anybody's ever seen Pan's Labyrinth from 2006 or The Shape of Water, which is another movie of his from 2017, he uses this technique because he blends the reality. In Pan's Labyrinth, it was the war. Okay, they were in the middle of the Second World War, I believe, and it tells the story of the little girl dealing with everything that's happening, and you're not sure if these creatures are real, if they're just in her mind or not. But he treats it all the same. The stuff that's happening in the war and the fantastic elements of this little girl's story, and also The Shape of Water, which takes place in the 1950s, I believe, 1950s or 60s in America. And he treats this woman's story and everything that's happening with scientific experiments and the Cold War with reality, but there's a creature of the Black Lagoon type character in there too, and it just happens to be okay. So that is magical realism. In case they ask about that on the test, different than fantasy. Fantasy is just 100%. We are going to another world like Star Wars or something. Okay, that would be fantasy, or maybe even Harry Potter could be that half and half, maybe fantasy and magical realism. Okay, moving ahead, before you start reading the story, is think about some tragic events that happened here in Brazil, and there have been a lot, especially natural disasters. Remember when we had the dam that broke a few years back, and it made all the Rio Doce, the water became brown, and a lot of people died. So think of any tragic events. Natural disasters would be nice, but also just, you know, regular tragedies like created by humans. Like there was a fire maybe 5, 6 years ago at this nightclub in the south of Brazil. How can these tragic events affect the course of your life? Okay, what do you think a tragic event would do to you? That's an important thing to think about as you read the story. Okay? Not only as a victim of a tragic event, but maybe somebody who's witnessed a tragic event. How do you think that these events affect your life and the course of your life? How would you be different if you were very close to a tragic event? And what's the backstory of And of Clay We Are Created? Okay, like I said, it's from the book The Stories of Eva Luna from 1989. It's based on a real life event, okay, that was lived by this young girl called Omaira Sanchez. She was 13, and she was the victim of a volcanic eruption in Colombia in November of 1985. Okay, so there was an actual, excuse me, there was an actual eruption of a volcano around this time, and it killed about 20,000 people, okay? About 25,000 people and 15,000 animals died in this disaster. And this young girl, she was stuck there. And if you can see on the right on the side here, in 1985, 13-year-old Omaira Sanchez was half stuck in debris from a volcanic eruption for 3 nights, during which she kept talking to the journalist in high spirits, dying in the end. And there's a quote: technology had been able to capture her image for all time and transmit it around the world, but it was unable to save her life. So, spoilers, somebody's going to die. End of Clay We Are Created. Quick synopsis. The short story takes place over a 3 day period, like we just saw. So, it's a fiction, but it's based on this real event. It tells the story of this Austrian filmmaker called Rolf Carlet in his attempts to save a young girl named Azucena, who is stuck in the mud and rubble in the aftermath of a volcanic eruption. The story is told by a persona. What is a persona? It's a person created by the author to tell a story. It's first person, okay? But it's not a real person. It's not like I'm telling the story. I create somebody and I tell it in their voice. In this case, it's Carla's romantic partner, also known as Eva Luna, who watches the events unfold from television. We find out about Carla's mindset, okay, what he's thinking, and his existential crisis through her interpretation of events. So let's dig into some analysis of this story, the themes, literary elements, etc. Well, as you read this story, pay attention to how Allende uses imagery to set the mood and put you in the middle of the action and drama. And there's a lot of types of imagery, and we studied this before, guys, I think in ninth grade. Auditory, visual, tactile. Imagery helps you feel as if you're in the story. You can smell and touch and see what the characters are touching and seeing and smelling in your mind. And now let's break it down. Some other devices, okay, and some other things that are used. Well, if you read the introduction, and I'm going to read it right now, it says, they discovered the girl's head protruding from the mud pit, eyes wide open, calling soundlessly. She had a first communion name, Azucena, Lily, in that vast cemetery where the odor of death was already attracting vultures. There's the smell, right? From far away, and where the weeping of orphans and wails of the injured filled the air. So now I've got sound. I can hear people crying and dying. And the little girl, obstinately clinging to life, became the symbol of the tragedy. The television cameras transmitted so often the unbearable image of the head budding like a black squash from the clay that there was no one who did not recognize her and know her name. So, again, she's describing her like a vegetable coming from the ground because she's stuck there. And every time we see her on the screen, right behind her was Rolf Carlet, who had gone there on assignment, never suspecting that he would find a fragment of his past, lost 30 years before. Foreshadowing, okay? We're going to get a little bit of foreshadowing here. Persona. So, who is the persona? It's the character created to tell the story. When the station called before dawn, Ralph Carlet and I were together. I crawled out of bed, dazed with sleep, and went to prepare coffee while he hurriedly dressed. He stuffed his gear in the green canvas backpack he always carried, and we said goodbye, as we had so many times before. I had no presentiments. I sat in the kitchen sipping my coffee and planning the long hours without him, sure that he would come back the next day. By the way, folks, in your material, there should be this right here, which is some of the vocabulary. So if you don't know some of these words, they're usually in black. Look in there and you will find out its meaning. Okay, presentiment is a feeling of something is going to happen in the future. Okay, like a presense. Sensory details. We got rescue teams. Hundreds of soldiers and volunteers from the civil defense were clawing through rubble, searching for survivors, while long rows of ragged specters awaited their turn for a cup of hot broth. That's like a soup. Radio networks announced that their phones were jammed with calls from families offering shelter to orphan families. So we get a visual of what's happening. The media is there. Reporters return to photograph Azucena and ask her the same questions which she no longer wanted to answer or tried to answer. In the meanwhile, more television and movie teams arrived with spools of cables, tapes, film, video, precious lenses, recorders, sound consoles, lights, reflecting screens, auxiliary motors, cartons of supplies, electricians, sound technicians, and cameramen. Azucena's face was beamed to millions across or around the world, and all the while, Ralph Carlet kept pleading for the pump because we find out in the story that he just wants to get a pump to pump the water out. We're going to do the longer version of this plot in a second, guys, and find out why he needed this pump, okay? Transition. So the transition is we have a little bit of a change in how things are happening. When darkness came on the second day, Rolf tried to sing Azucena to sleep with old Australian folk songs he had learned from his mother, but she was far beyond sleep. They spent most of the night talking, each in a stupor of exhaustion and hunger, and shaking with cold. The night imperceptibly the unwielding floodgates that had contained Rolf Carlet's past for so many years began to open. Oh, that night, imperceptibly. That makes sense now. And the torrent of all that had lain hidden in the deepest and most secret layers of memories poured out, leveling before it the obstacles that had blocked his consciousness for so long. So remember, we talked about this existential crisis. What does life mean? It starts to happen here in the second day. That's the transition in the story. And remember, she foreshadowed it in the first paragraph, or the second paragraph, actually, that Rolf would have this change, would have this profound thing would happen to him while he's taking care of this little girl. Spoilers, she dies. You are back with me. Okay, so this is the narrator talking about Rolf. Okay, because after the events, the little girl dies. He's back. You are back with me, but you are not the same man. I often accompany you to the station and we watch the videos of Azucena again. The station is the television station. You study them intently, looking for something you could have done to save her, something you did not think of in time. Or maybe you study them to see yourself as if in a mirror, naked. Your cameras lie forgotten in a closet. You do not write or sing. You sit long hours before the window, staring at the mountains. Beside you, I wait for you to complete the voyage into yourself, for the old wounds to heal. I know that when you return from your nightmares, we shall walk again, hand in hand, as before. So this event had a profound change in his life. He doesn't even want to use his cameras. He doesn't want to do any of this anymore. He's done. Okay? So let's get to it, guys. Let's get a plot overview. Okay? So the story It opens abruptly, okay? With the starting line, they discovered the girl's head protruding from the mud pit. We read that already. The girl is a 13-year-old called Azucena, one of thousands of people who are living on the slope of a mountain. And there was the volcanic eruption, and the heat melted the ice and it created mudslides. So all the mud came down and it killed a whole lot of people, over 20,000. The narrator is not named. People call her Eva Luna because it's part of the book, this short story told by this woman called Eva Luna. And she is watching as Rolf Karl, okay, is the first television, or Carle is the first television reporter on the scene, okay, and he has Austrian descent. And him and his assistant film the attempts to rescue the girl, but these volunteers are unable to throw a rope to her. She doesn't even want to grab the rope, okay? So he decides, hey, I'm not just going to stand here. I'm going to go in there and try to save her myself. He ties this rope under her arm and he tells her, I'm going to get you out. But as he's pushing, or in this case, pulling, to get her free, she is stuck. Okay? She can feel something under her holding her legs. And some people think it's parts of an old house. She says it's the bodies of her dead brothers and sisters. And also, the mud has created a suction, like under her. So she can't get out, okay, because of the suction. And back in the city, the narrator was watching from home on TV, and then she decides, hey, I'm going to go down to the TV station and watch this unedited, okay? So she also decides to help by telephoning important government people, business people, anybody she can think of to locate a pump. And why did they need a pump? Because remember I said her legs were stuck with the suction of mud, so the pump would get everything out, okay? But nobody has a pump. Rolf Carle is asking and asking. Nobody has a pump, or it would be too difficult to get this pump over there. So the narrator is trying to help by calling important people, and she watches the screen and she can begin to feel Carle's pain and frustration. And she cries for this girl. And she starts to see that Carle has reached a sort of tiredness that she's never seen before. It's like she no longer sees him as the reporter, but sees him as him. He loses that facade of a reporter. Meanwhile, the story gets picked up by many other news agencies. Crowds of people come and surround Azucena and Carle, sending pictures of the girl to millions around the world. A doctor examines the girl, a priest goes there and blesses her, but no one can do anything to help her. And it's ironic, remember that, okay, that the area is littered with generators and lights and wires and other technical equipment for the television crews, but no one can locate a pump. As the second day closes, remember that was the transition, as Azucena and Carle continue to talk quietly and pray. Carle has no more stories to tell her to keep her entertained, so he begins telling her stories that the narrator told him, Eva. He also begins to sing some folk songs he learned as a little boy from Austria. But as he's singing these songs, he starts to remember his youth. Okay? And he starts to remember these things that he had buried in the past, underground. Okay? And speaking of burying, he remembers burying bodies at a concentration camp. Oh, excuse me, at a concentration camp. The way his father was abusive, his retarded sister, and how fearful she was, his mother's humiliation. Because remember, he grew up in Austria, okay? So these things were happening around that time, okay? He keeps these memories to himself, Okay, he doesn't tell the girl, but he starts to examine them in his head like he had never before. And he starts to realize he is trapped, just like this little girl. Okay, she's physically trapped, but he's trapped in here. Okay, and that may be the worst prison when you're trapped in your mind. Okay, and he realizes that all these adventures, all of this journalism that he's been doing, it's been a way to escape his fear, escape himself. So his feelings now are exposed like never before. And he feels so closer to this girl, okay? And emotionally closer to her like never before. And then we have the third day. And Azucena and Carle are both cold, hungry, and exhausted. The president of the republic comes down to be filmed with the girl. He tells the girl, "You are an example to the nation," and promises to personally send the pump, but it's too late. As the narrator watches on the screen, she can tell the precise moment when the girl just gives up. In the reporter, too, Carle. Okay, they give up hoping for a rescue. They understand, hey, we're gonna die, or actually, the young girl is gonna die. Okay, but it's a moment of peace for both of them. They stop struggling. Okay, the narrator does find the pump and does find a way to send it, but on the third night, the girl dies. It's too late. Okay, Carle takes the tire. He had put a tire around her to keep her kind of floating like this. You know, a tire that you use in a car. He takes the tire from under her arm, and the girl slips into the mud and dies. The last scene of the story, which we read, occurs after Carle has returned home. For some time, he has not worked. He has watched a film of himself in Azucena countless times, wondering what he might have done to help her. The narrator addresses him directly, assuring him that the wounds opened by his experience with the girl will heal in time. Okay? By the way, there's the hyperlink up top, okay? So you can click on that, and this site has a whole lot of stuff about the characters, the plot, the themes, so you can study a little bit more. In that slide about Guillermo del Toro, I think I put a hyperlink there too, if you want to see more about magical realism. Guys, some of the questions and assignments, which you can see in the back here of your little book, okay, which you have the PDF version. So what you see on the screen is just another version of this right here. It does ask you to make a timeline of events. So that's why I do suggest reading the story for yourself or the plot summary there. And mark it down because they may ask you that in a future test. Okay? Some questions for you. How can you connect this to your personal experiences? Well, you did just hear the plot summary. Which of these characters do you identify with the most? The little girl, Ralph Carle, the narrator just watching helplessly? Which one of these characters do you identify with the most? Symbolism. Well, think about what are Azucena's circumstances at the beginning of the story, and what did she come to symbolize as the story progressed? And you got a little bit of that through the plot summary. I think you'll get that even more if you read the story. And it's not long, guys. You can read it in 30 minutes. Okay? It's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pages. Okay? I read it on the way home on the train. Very quick story. Oh, and what did she come to symbolize as the story progressed? So that's important. That's when you get to the transition part, day 2 and on to day 3. Okay, so what did she come to symbolize to Ralph Carle more than anyone? Irony. Okay, well, what is irony? It's when actual meaning is the complete opposite of the literal meaning. Let me make this a little bigger for you guys. So, contradiction actual and literal meaning. So you have verbal irony, like you see in the picture there. The guy says, "I'm fine," but actually he's not. And situational irony, difference between expectation and reality. Okay, finally figures out that his psychologist is one of the dead people, um, which I don't get that exactly. But remember when we were reading, right? We have all these technological things, but we don't have the one thing that we need. Okay, because the expectation as we're reading, there's this, there's that, there's cameras, there's lights, there's all this technology, but we don't have the one technological thing that we need. So that's an example of one ironic situation in the story. They want to know which others did you notice, although I guess you could use that one. And how do you think these ironies further the main message of the story? Think about the president going to visit her. That could be something that deals with irony too, guys. So, irony is a big part of the story. The title. What do you think the title of this story means? And of clay we are created. And do you think it's appropriate title? Think of it on a physical level because she's stuck in the clay. But what creation happens? Okay? What creation? What makes you into who you are? Is it easy times or hard times? Think about that. Think about being stuck and what happens when you are unstuck. What does that create in you? Okay? So, this is a good question here that you can think about. Character roles. Rolf and Azucena, Ralph Carlet, exchange roles by the end of the story. Explain how this happens and how this transition begins. Okay? So we saw that on day 2, we had these transitions. So I suggest you read and find out what these transitions are. In your book, day 2 begins. Let me see if I can find it quickly. It's impossible to reach her. Someone brought her coffee. That was a long night. Let me see, guys, if I can find it quickly, but I don't think I can find it quickly. Oh, no, I wrote notes. Ah, look at Mr. Ray, Phil, writing notes. Okay, you should do the same. Day 2. Okay, that's when you start to have the memories of the Holocaust. It's on page 202. And that's when we start to get to the darkness, on the darkness of day 2. So at night, right, when everything's a little more quiet, when we start to think about things, think about these transitions and how Azucena and him kind of flip roles, because they definitely do, and explain how it is that this happens and what this transition represents. Cultural importance. Allende writes in Spanish and about her life in Latin America. Do you think it's beneficial to read stories from people of other cultures? If so, what benefits are out there? Are there? Okay? We read a lot of stuff. Well, we here in Brazil, or Brazilians, consume a lot of American stuff. So this question I think is more interesting for Americans because Americans consume American stuff. They don't consume a lot of stuff from around the world. So I think this is a good question for young American children, what benefit they can have from reading stuff from other cultures, but it's valid for you, young Brazilian kids, too. What benefits do you get from reading something from Argentina, from Chile, from Germany, from India, from China, and of course from America, too? Okay, what can you learn? What benefit does it have, if any? Okay, so think about that. And last, here, as far as questions, we have some quick analogies and vocab practice. An analogy, guys, is something that I can use to describe something else. I can make a comparison, okay? They're kind of similar. We studied this in public speaking. Ecstasy is to celebrant as tribulation is to what? Surveyor, victim, or participant. Think about it and send me your answers if you want. Hostility is to unfriendliness as pandemonium is to what? Simplicity, insecurity, or confusion. Okay, so again, if you don't understand this, the first two words are related in some way, and then the second two words need to be related. So if hostility is close to unfriendliness, pandemonium is close to what? Is it close to being simple, to being insecure, or confusion? Okay, uh, uh, I'll let you figure that one out. Fortitude is to weakness, as bedlam is to what? Peace, cruelty, uproar. Now, this analogy, guys, fortitude is strength. Weakness, well, is weakness. So sometimes analogies can be of things that are opposite. So pay attention to that if they ask questions like that on the test. So what would be the opposite of bedlam? Bedlam, if you don't know that word, it's confusion, it's riots, it's things that are like this. So what do you think of these three words would be the opposite of bedlam? Chance is to fate. Those seem like opposites, right? As presentiment is to what? Okay. We got premonition, nightmare, or change. Chance is to fate as presentiment is to what? Oh, excuse me. And equanimity is to serenity as obscurity is to what? Okay. Is it close to insensitivity, uneasiness, or vagueness? Okay. So those are the last little bit from this slide, guys. What I also have here for you, whoops, wrong button, is this. There's an audio version of Clay We Are Made. So if you just click on that play button, like that,
tangle of her hair.
you should get the story. Okay, so you can get, oh look, The Lord of the Flies. That's a great book, great story. So that's it. Okay, guys, have a great weekend. If you have any questions, if you want me to help you with that last one, those last analogies, not a problem, but they have a lot of questions like that. They love questions like that in English. Um, Allende makes a link between the mud or clay in which Azucena is mired and the metaphorical mud or clay out of which life is created. Link is an academic word. More familiar words with similar meanings are connection, bond, and relationship. Okay, so that's the analogy that she makes, and that is it. Okay, that is it for that, guys. Have a great weekend. Look out for a video next Friday. Have a good one. Bye bye.